are listening to Faithless Brewing, a Magic the Gathering podcast for the Spike Rogue. Each week, we design new decks for tournament play. We put our creations to the test and share our findings on the air. David and I will be discussing our results with Calibrated Blast. Then, we'll show you why Shambling Ghast is the freshest, stenchiest new card, capable of trading favorably with MH2's flagship Mythic and going infinite with Liliana. That's all coming up on this edition of the Faithless Brewing podcast. Thanks for listening and enjoy the show.
Hello and welcome to the Faithless Brewing Podcast. I am David Robertson, coming to you live from the Twin Cities, and I am joined by Damon Alexander out of Seattle. Damon, what is poppin'?
Hey, not too much. Just watching a nice sunset now. Trying to figure out which cards from AFR I should be speccing on for my Damon Finance newsletter.
Sending to your stockholders quarterly.
Oh, yeah.
So the CEO of the Faithless Brewing Podcast, he is Daniel Schriever, Cavedan Online. He is spending some quality time with the fam this week. He will not be joining us, but he'll be back next week with all kinds of hot takes about how, looting is better than drawing, et cetera, et cetera. Just a quick reminder, we are still releasing our 2 episodes a week. So if you tuned in on Friday, you heard our analysis of all of the latest Forgotten Realms tech. For a set that was, really maligned for its low power level, we found a bunch of cool tech in both Modern and Pioneer at the highest level of the weekend challenges. So check that out if you want to hear the latest and greatest on that. This episode, we are going to talk about our experimentation with Calibrated Blast, kind of an underexplored card for Modern Horizons 2. And then we are going to get into our first card we are going to monkey around with a little bit in Modern from Forgotten Realms, and that is the Shambling Ghast. So Damon, give us a quick recap for people who don't know. What is a Calibrated Blast?
Yeah, well, the word blast, I think we all know, is when something explodes, and calibration is the art of taking something imprecise and making it precise through a sequence of measurements. In the game of Magic, this card in particular is an evolution on Erratic Explosion, 2 and a red to reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal a non-land card. Put that revealed card on the bottom of your library in a random order, and then when you reveal a non-land card this way, the blast deals damage to equal to that card's mana value to any target. And it's an instance. You can do this during your upkeep, for example, and we'll get into why you'd want to do that in a little bit. So this is one of these new, I think they're called reflexive triggers. So the way it happens is you cast Calibrated Blast. You don't declare any targets. You just put it on the stack. You say, I'm casting Calibrated Blast. And your opponent then counters it or lets it resolve. If it resolves, then you go through the mechanics of revealing cards. You're basically doing a cascade, but instead of casting the card, you're blasting the card. And then from there, once you figure out what that card is, put it on the bottom of the library, then a new trigger goes on the stack where to put on the stack, you have to declare targets as part of that. And so kind of an interesting templating that seems to be the way things are going with these reflexive triggers, which weren't even a thing as of like a year or two ago. And then lastly, the card is, if the first blast didn't get there, this card also has flashback for 3 red.
Yeah, so it's kind of nice if you have an option, maybe to kill a creature to stay alive, but if you hit, you're a certain CMC, your opponent dies, you can cast this, and then based on what you hit, right, you can assign triggers as appropriate. You reveal a CMC 10, you kill your opponent if it's, only 3, you're going to stop their DRC or whatever.
Yeah. So this is definitely a huge upgrade over the prior version of this card, Erratic Explosion, which was a sorcery. You had to declare your target as you cast it, which means you could just kind of lose the ability to adjust your decision as you figure out how you're blasting. It even was so generous to have flashback. So David pitched us a bunch of lists last week, and the key premise here is that, this blast may be calibrated in certain ways with the reflexive trigger, but it's not really calibrated in the sense that it is still dealing a random amount of damage. How do you control that variance? And so in particular, you probably want to play a card that costs the maximal mana value known to this game, which is 15 mana, in the form of either Emrakul the Aeon's Torn or Otto Chthon Worm. I don't know how to say that word.
I don't either.
And find ways to put that on top of your deck. And so, in particular, some of these ways can include a card like Scheming Symmetry, or Brainstone, or Mwanvuli Beast Tracker, or even Witch's Cottage. And we tried basically all these ways in the leagues.
Yeah, so I mean, there's a bunch of different ways to build this deck. Are any of them good enough? We weren't sure, but so we tried a bunch of them. So I think, Damon, you took the first crack at it. You called this list Zoomer Jund because it is Jund colors. We are trying to use some of the cards you named. I see you have 3 Scheming Symmetry, 2 Brainstone. You have Mishra's Bauble to track the top card of your deck, as well as Grim Flare, and Mwanvuli Beast Tracker with Autochthon Worm.
Yeah. So we have this core Zoomer Jund shell of the Dragon Raids Chandlers, the Ignoble Hierarchs, Renin 6, Mishra's Bauble, Bolts, Inquisition, and Thoughtseize. And that's where we kind of fall off the Zoomer Jund train into the, I can't really call it boomer cards, just weird cards in the form of the Worm and the Blast and the Scheming Symmetry, along with a true, I would say, boomer Jund card in the form of Grim Flare. What that says about Dan Schriever, I will let you draw your own conclusions over his boomer or zoomer status. So I took it to a League of Modern. I went 1-4. I lost to Greenback Black Luris 0-2, to Affinity 1-2, Black White Blade 1-2. Snuck one out against Ad Nauseam 2-1, and lost to Amulet Titan 1-2. So not a great record in 1-4, but I did get a blast a lot of people. It didn't always win the game. Sometimes it just won 1 out of 3 games, but it was a lot of fun. Casting Calibrated Blast was really exciting when it lined up.
So would you say that you lost these games because you couldn't get the combo to go off, or were you able to get the combo to go off at a reasonable clip, but 15 damage is not 20, which we were aware of, and that was the problem that was really holding you back?
Yeah. So the way I view this deck is it's trying to accomplish 2 goals in the game of Magic. First, deal 5 damage. Second, deal 15 damage. Maybe in the other order, but usually in that order. And the deck was actually able to consistently do one of the 2. So you could find a way to get your blast off with just, all it takes is Scheming Symmetry plus the blast. It's even, with flashback on blast, your opponent can Thoughtseize it all they want, but it'll be in your graveyard. But trying to get both plans to line up in the same game of Magic was just asking a lot out of these cards. The Zoomer Jund shell, when you get the draws that have nothing to do with Blast or Worm or anything, just playing only Zoomer Jund, it's like, wow, these are some really good cards. Dragon Raids Chandler is so good. You go turn 1 DRC into Bauble, or turn 1 Ignoble into Renin 6 into DRC into whatever the way these things work out. It just felt like lean and mean. All of a sudden, you're attacking your opponent in chunks of 3 or 4 with a DRC, with possibly with Exalted. Grim Flare actually kind of slotted in well into that. You're going for Delirium anyway, so it seemed to be kind of working towards the same goal. But the thing is that sometimes you have kind of like the half and half, or you have a close Zoomer Jund game and you're about to pull ahead, but all of a sudden your opponent is trading with you, and then your draw for the turn is an Autochthon Worm or whatever, and you are way off track. And sometimes you're just kind of going, you have to devote resources to the blasting plan. It does take, in general, 2 cards, the blast plus the tutor effect. You don't tend to get it for free, with the exception of possibly like Brainstone does it naturally without going down on cards. But unless you count, the body on Mwanvuli Beast Tracker highly, you're devoting a card to the purpose. And so you can get the 15 damage in, but you're kind of down on resources. And so, for example, against Green Black Luris, they were just like push Thoughtseize. And there's just really no way to assemble both game plans before I died to, their Dauthi Voidwalkers. Meanwhile, Affinity did no damage themselves off the land, so you have to get through blockers, but meanwhile, they're dumping out Memnites, they're bumping out Ornithopters, which they then put Shadow Spears on against your, Dragon Raids Chandler. I was able to actually sneak a win with the Blast line against them, and the games were actually kind of close, but it wasn't enough. The Black-White Blade deck had this card Kaya's Guile, which is both life gain against your blast lines, trying to deal, somewhere around 20, and also exiles the blast out of your graveyard, also ruins your Delirium. So all of a sudden you just have like a 1/1 Chandler, no hand, and no graveyard.
So was there one way of assembling the combo that was better than another? Did you feel like, if I had, really leaned into one of these things, it would have been, a little less disruptive?
If you believe in the deck's ability to deal the first 5 damage, the Scheming Symmetry lines were by far the cleanest. It just happens, 2 red and a single black is all you need. So 4 mana total to deal 15 damage off 2 cards. That is very efficient. The Brainstorm lines were okay. They felt a little bit clunky. It wasn't sure, are you trying to use the brainstorm for value early or save it for when you draw the Autochthon Worm? Maybe that's just, just a mental block. You have to figure it out and then do it that way for the rest of your life. The Beast Tracker was interesting because it had this like failure mode where in sideboarding, against Adnos, I just kind of cut the deal 15. They side in Leyline of Sanctity, which is a totally blank Calibrated Blast, along with all your Thoughtseizes. It turns out actually you just can't win if they do that because you can't kill them by turn 4 if they have a Leyline out, and you can't Thoughtseize them. But it turns out Waterloo Beast Tracker can also get Grim Flayer.
Yeah,
which
that's
is
right.
Incredibly desperate line. I've also Witch's Cottage for a Grim Flayer. Also a very desperate line, but sometimes with these decks, you're trying to win on very thin margins.
Were you ever calibrating blasting in the dark? Like you'd done your 15, you just needed to do 3 or 4 or whatever, and you were just hoping to hit, Luris or whatever off the top?
I calibrated Blast in the Dark a few times, hoping for the 15 a little bit more optimistically, and didn't get there. This deck is not good at the blind Calibrated Blast. The big problem with this list, honestly, is that it's really hard to sideboard, because the thing is that you have these two game plans that both are very intensive, not always easy to accomplish, already at their margins of what they're trying to accomplish. And so what are you cutting to bring in, your Veil of Summers, your Alpine Moons or whatever? You kind of just have to give up one or the other, but if that's going to be the case, the one you kind of have to give up is the Blast plan. And so then you're saying that the Blast is like a good game 1 plan, but it's really... I feel like there's better, game 1 plans you sideboard out of than this.
So all in all, Calibrated Blast, just as a straight up sort of value card, we didn't think was going to get there with this type of shell. It's asking a little bit too much of you, and it's not doing enough.
Yeah. And even the flashback, I mean, it looks good. It's actually not bad to have that available to you, but actually it's double red, and so this deck is primarily green-black, and so even that part was hard sometimes. That's okay. Yeah, the Zoomer Jund shell, I mean, that part is good, and this list is actually a lot of fun to play. If you have some friends, you're trying to play kind of tier 2 level modern, you're trying to have some laughs, this deck is totally the perfect fit for that. You may actually, maybe a listener here can figure out a way to tune this. For example, 4 Calibrated Blasts is probably too many. You can dig towards them with the Dragon Rage Chandlers and the Baubles and the Grim Flayers. You can even mill it off the Dragon Rage Chandler and be happy off your Surveil and rely on the flashback. And so, for example, you don't need to have 4. Maybe even with the Autochthon Worms, you could go down to 1 and rely on either Brainstone to get out of your hand, or if you mill it, rely on Witch's Cottage to get it back up. Is there a way to kind of streamline and get the right number of the blast cards along with the right Zoomer Jund shell?
Okay, well, I mean, at least some ideas to work on. It's nice to just do 15 damage to your opponent sometimes, even if they win the war.
Yeah.
So Dan took some of those similar concepts into a league. He played a Rakdos Gorios Vengeance list. So this is combining the Calibrated Blast, but he also has the Emrakul Gorios Vengeance. So, if he can't put Emrakul on top of his deck, he can discard it, to Liliana, or he can, discard it to Bone Shards, and then Gorios Vengeance it into play. He also has, is it Kregenhorn Cremator?
Yeah.
Something like that. So that's a 5/4 for 4, and when it enters play, you discard a card at random, and then you do damage equal to the CMC, or mana value now, of that card. So that's another way he could hit with Emrakul. He's playing 4 Profane Tutors, I think in theory to find the missing half of whatever his combo is. He has 2 Brainstones to manipulate the top of his deck a little bit, and he has 1 of Scheming Symmetry. So trying to do a lot of things. His notes here are that this is perhaps the worst deck I've ever played.
Gets the 3-2.
We went 3-2. I mean, we played some wild lists, especially when the Discord got to pick the card we had to brew around. So we're throwing on some strong words here with worst deck I've ever played. And he was playing real decks. I mean, he beat Crashing Footfalls. He beat Eldrazi Tron and Izzet Murktide. That's not a terrible showing. He did point out it was very difficult to assemble the combos without card selection, and said that he wished he'd played more Brainstone. So that's interesting. At least in the shell he was playing, maybe he had a little bit more time to assemble everything.
Yeah. This is an interesting list. I mean, it seems like it doesn't have the ability to attack with, for example, a Dragon Rage Chandler, and so you're looking to deal with the extra 5 Either if you got a Goryo's Emrakul lineup, you maybe have all the time in the world to deal extra 5. A single hit from a Krakenwood Cremator will suffice. Or alternatively, you rely on like the bolts. Dan mentions in a game he had like a bolt plus a Collective Brutality to deal 5. Or just a bolt plus your opponent doing a fetch shock will suffice.
Yeah, and you can always fire off a Calibrated Blast blind. The CMC in Modern on average is quite low. Even in our decks where we're putting some of these 15s in, we're playing a lot of 1s and 2s. 3 mana instant do 1 damage to your opponent is bad, but you got to get them from 5 to 0 somehow. And it might be...
Just don't hit your Profane Tutor.
Exactly.
Oof.
So yeah, he says that the Goryo's angle was very poor. It involved a lot of moving pieces. It was really hard to set up, and it never came up. Plus, there's just a ton of graveyard hate. And I'm not surprised. We have not seen a lot of Goryo's Vengeance-based decks in a while. It has proven to be very difficult to do as Modern has been given more and more tools to attack the graveyard. Sideboard hate against that stuff is so strong. And Emrakul's an instant, or must be brought back at instant speed, so you can't just... store it there at the end of their turn or whatever, and then on your turn untap and go for it. So I'm not surprised that had problems. I am surprised he went 3-2, especially considering, his verbiage that this list is so anemic, his words. But yeah, between him going 3-2 and you going 1-4, we're talking about something that's, getting near 50% win percentage here.
Yeah. It's so funny though. I mean, my 1-4 felt like it was against tier 2 decks with tier 2 opponents, and Dan was like, playing a challenge. I mean, he lost to Velomachus turns in Hammer Time, and then he beat Footfalls, Etron, and Murktide. That's serious opposition. So he must have a little bit of the magic in his step or in his blasts.
We do like to call Dan the Modern Whisperer. He often describes a Modern that nobody online or on this podcast recognizes, and then somehow he creates those game states that allow him to do his dirtly thing. So, undaunted by the anemic deck that allowed him to finish 3-2, he rebuilt a Grixis version. So, kept the Profane Tutors, added 4 Serum Visions for a little bit of manipulation, and obviously Serum Vision's a draw, then Scry 2 really gives you a lot of control over your deck. Went up to the 4 Brainstones, is playing a 1 of Snapcaster Mage, only 1 Goryo's Vengeance, still the 4 Calibrated Blast, 2 Jace the Mind Sculptor, obviously a rich man's Brainstone. Played 3 Prismari Commands, a card that he's quite fond of in Modern. A 1 of Through the Breach as his sort of combo piece instead of those other Goryo's Vengeances. And then the 4 Emrakuls. Went 3-2 again, but this time he said it was much better. So I think it's another example maybe of not being too results-oriented. As you're playing, you have a sense of if the deck feels good or bad. He did say that Through the Breach and Prismari Command were very good, and that Profane Tutor held it all together. I have really been impressed by Profane Tutor as a card. Assuming you have ways to interact on 1, tapping out on turn 2 for this isn't the end of the world, and if it's finding one of, an A plus B combo, that's actually good enough, because turn 4 is typically when you kind of have to do your thing or die, and this is a card that lets you do your thing.
Yeah, and he really enabled it in the deck construction here. There's a single Through the Breach, there's a single Goryo's Vengeance, there's a single Scheming Symmetry. So you have access to these one-ofs, but a lot more reliably thanks to the 4 Profane Tutor. And so in terms of assembling an A-B combo, this deck is, looks to be very reliable. And then it just leans into the bolts and the, secondary blasts to finish people off, along with Prismari Command can deal an extra 2 damage in a pinch. Yeah, this looks like probably the best list we've tried so far.
Yeah, and I'm wondering if you could maybe get rid of some of these cards and just almost go like a Grixis Control Shell that's just got 4 Through the Breach or closer to 4, and then 4 Calibrated Blast, and then a bunch of Snapcasters. And you're sort of playing like a fair game, and then at some point you either assemble your Brainstone plus Calibrated Blast or Through the Breach plus Emrakul. And you just, but you're Snapcasting back, Thought Seizes and Lightning Bolts to not die.
Yeah, my concern though is that there are plenty of ways to not die to a Calibrated Blast. One of them is just to, cards like Land of Sanctity go a long way. The other is to not take 5 damage from, your own lands. The other is to gain some life. One opponent I played against on Green White Black Blade was playing, one of the games they were ephemerating their Charming Prince to gain a bunch of life. And so I got them down to 3 life at one point, and then they were back at 12. And I wasn't able to get the second lethal blast off. And so there's just kind of ways to disrupt the combo. And the longer the game goes, the more likely they are to find those lines. You're going to be stretched thin. And the other thing is that meanwhile, through the Breach Emrakul lists were kind of popular before MH2, and they seem to have completely dropped off the map. And those lists were built around the premise of not dealing 15, around turn 4, turn 5, but rather around turn 6, 7, 8. Maybe turn 4 if they have a Prismari command and they just draw into it naturally.
Agreed. So where does this leave us? We were looking at Brainstone. We were looking at Calibrated Blast. It seems to me like the takeaway is that Brainstone is about as clunky as we thought it would be. It's a lot different from being able to cast at an instant speed. It's 1 mana to play. It's 2 to activate. So we're talking about most of the way to a Jace, the Mind Sculptor, although you get to pay in installments. But you don't get those cases where Jace just wins the game. You Wrath of God, resolve your Jace. All of a sudden, Jace is brainstorming 2 or 3 times, and the opponent is not throwing down yet, but the game is functionally over. At least in this instance, it did seem like Brainstone, that 2 mana to activate, it's just a lot to ask because we want to resolve another spell after that.
Yeah, if you're getting something really powerful to happen off of the Brainstone, the key example being Terminus, or even if you're just simply enabling Delirium off of Dragon's Race Chandler, these are good things to do. The list we were playing were, this Calibrated Blast line, Brainstone helps, but it doesn't help that much. My list only played 2 Autothon Worm. I really didn't want to draw them in the first place. So it was nice to have an outlet, but it was tough to find the right balance. And the thing is, like the natural Brainstone, for value is a cantrip. Yeah, it's kind of clunky. You need more supporting cards or just a more powerful payoff than what we were going for.
And it would not be, experimenting with Brainstone would not be complete without a great Brainstone lock picture, which Damon did provide for us. That lock, if you're a Legacy player, is you cast Brainstorm. You don't find a shuffle effect, so you put back 2 cards. Often you're looking for a land. You put back your 2 non-lands. So not only did you not find a land, you know what your next few draws are. You have no way to alter them, and so you can often functionally, extend the right hand to your opponent at that time.
Yeah. I played this one out, but it was ugly.
Yeah.
I was so ready. I mean, I had a Beast Tracker in hand, a Calibrated Blast in hand, I had the Autothon Worm. I was going to put that, possibly put the Worm on top, play a land, upkeep, go for the Blast. I had big dreams, cracked the Brainstone, and they didn't work out. Just as bad as a Brainstorm lock.
So what were our impressions of Calibrated Blast? Dan has notes here. He seemed to actually think the card was powerful, even just as a generic, 3 mana, do X amount of damage, maybe even without the combo, he was saying, just playing a lot of split cards and stuff to sort of artificially have a high CMC deck. You could even play some of these free spells. He's a big fan of the 5 mana Elemental with Evoke, right? So that's a 5 that you're kind of hiding in your deck that really only costs 0.
Yes, well, Dan is hypothesizing about playing a deck with split cards or whatever to get this random chance of dealing 4 damage off your Fire and Ice or whatever. Everybody else in the world is getting Delirium and casting on Holy Heat to get 6 damage reliably for a single mana. So I gotta say that I'm not sure I follow this line of thinking in today's Modern, but I am not, in fact, a Modern Whisperer.
Yeah, the fact that you can change the target is kind of nice, but, the threats are really cheap. And so even if Calibrated Blast is killing their threat, you're still probably spending 3 mana for their 1-drop. And then at some point, you're spending 5 mana to kill their 3-drop. And they're just up, mana, they're up tempo. So, I am kind of impressed by the fact that we had a couple of winning records with some of these shells, especially, like I said, as Modern kind of gets turbocharged. But I'm not sure that I'm interested in continuing to iterate in the Calibrated Blast or Brainstone space.
Yeah. But we'll see. I mean, new printings come out.
Yeah, absolutely.
We just lose our memory and decide to do dumb things again.
Well, and at some point they've got to print a 16 CMC card or a 17. I mean,
right. 20 mana value enchantment, and we'll be playing our clerics.
Yeah, exactly. Perfect.
Maybe Beast Tracker. But we're not there yet.
All right, so I think, that does it for that. We would now like to talk about Forgotten Realms. So this card is a little innocuous, but it specifically functions with a combo that we were pretty excited about. So, Damon, tell us about Shambling Ghast.
Yes, this is 1 black mana for a 1/1 zombie that has a death trigger where you get to choose either to Brave the Stench, giving target creature an opponent controls -1/-1 till end of turn, or you can search the body of your Shambling Ghast and find a treasure token.
Yeah, so Shambling Ghast, very innocuous. A 1-mana 1/1. It is a common in a set that has, really been criticized for not bringing it on the power level. But there's an interaction that was pointed out online, and that is its interaction with Liliana Untouched by Death. So, Damon, can you read that card to us?
Yes, this is 2 black for a 4 loyalty Liliana Planeswalker. +1 mills 3 from your library. If one of them or more is a zombie card, each opponent loses 2 life and you gain 2 life. So +1 to kind of self-mill and gain some life. -2, target creature gets -X until EOT, where X is number of zombies you control. -3, you may cast zombie cards from your graveyard this turn. So it is very much the zombie Liliana. All the Lilianas seem to have, some notion or some connection to zombies or necromancy. But this one is like truly zombie tribal. So notably, the -3, you may cast zombie cards from your graveyard this turn. If you look, you'll see the beginnings of a combo. Shambling Ghast is a single black mana for a card that on death creates a treasure token. So we're only missing a single piece here, right?
Yeah, so if you combine Liliana Untouched by Death and a Ghast, either in play or in the graveyard, with a Goblin Bombardment, for instance, you get to kill your opponent. So every time Shambling Ghast dies to Goblin Bombardment, does 1 to your opponent. Treasure enters play, you cast it again, and repeat ad nauseum. This happens, Liliana's ultimate, if you will. It happens the turn she enters play. And if you just go turn 1, Ghast, turn 2 Bombardment, on turn 3 you can even play your Liliana. So it can happen quite fast. You have the capability of assembling these relatively easily. So that already is interesting because I do think that a 1/1 that gives -1/-1 when it dies just has generic value, especially because a lot of these threats we're talking about, this interacts profitably with them. So it blocks Ragavan. It can kill DRC early in the game. If you can sack your Shambling Ghast to do 1 to one of them and give the -1/-1 to the other, that's great. And then the normal thing that sucks, though, is if the creature dies and there's nothing to give -1/-1 to, you sort of lose that ability. Now you get to store this treasure for later, in theory, for some possibly explosive turns.
Yeah, if your opponent goes turn 1 Ragavan, one of the strongest card in Modern we have right now, and you go turn 1 Shambling Ghast, what are they going to do? Unholy heat your Ghast and lose their Ragavan, attack with their Ragavan, and they trade, but you get a treasure? Like, you come out ahead against the premier mythic of MH2.
Yeah, so, at least our baseline, our fail case, we don't draw any combo pieces. It's just good against Ragavan, right? That's something. And so I built a bunch of lists that are trying to kind of find a way to use Shambling Ghast. This is the type of card that Dan Schriever especially loves, eking out these minor value cards and getting into these grindy, mid-range kind of slop fest. So first list, I'm calling it Modern Bombardment Zombies. On 1, we have 4 Ethervile. And then we have 4 Carrion Feeder, 4 Gravecrawler, 4 Shambling Ghast, 3 Tragic Slip, 1 Cryptbreaker. On 2, Undead Augur, 4 Goblin Bombardment. On 3 mana, Mayhem Devil. I have 4 Jarl's Messenger here. That could be Plague Belcher. It's worth noting that Plague Belcher also pays you off every time a zombie dies. Your opponent loses a life. So if you don't want the Jarl's Messenger lines, I do think that Plague Belcher is a better blocker. Maybe that's a better thing to do. And then 3 Liliana Untouched by Death, 21 lands. So I think the red-black zombie shell at times has been okay. I know people, a bunch of streamers have tried various shells like this. Undead Augur with, the Carrion Feeder Gravecrawler combo is, a good way to kind of eke out value in the middle of the game. Mayhem Devil kind of combos with all these sacrifice effects to, do a bunch of, burst damage. And the fact that Shambling Ghast leaves a treasure and treasure a sacrifice means that maybe Mayhem Devil is even more effective than normal. So this is the first shell that I'd like to experiment with using Shambling Ghast. What are your thoughts, Damon?
Yeah, this looks like a cool, zombie list with a lot of combo potential, which seems like the place that if you're going to play zombies in Modern, you probably just need to have that power level present. We had some nice chatter on. We have a Google Hangouts thread where the 3 of us chat, and kind of like the key premise here is when you're going for this combo line with a Shambling Ghast, you're trying to build your deck in a way that is kind of all in on the combo, or with a creature base that can win, game 2 when your opponent casts a Rest in Peace or Grafdigger's Cage or whatever. And so this list with this strong zombie base will certainly struggle against those cards. Gravecrawler is a Savannah Lions at that point. It can't even actually a worse Savannah Lions. But still, sometimes your opponent gets Rest in Peace and Dredge or a deck like this just assembles a bunch of cheapo dudes and swings to victory. And the thing is that when you play cards like Mayhem Devil and Goblin Bombardment, your opponent may, shut down the graveyard as much as they want. But if you have 5 zombies in play and those 2 cards out, you have a ton of damage potential.
Yeah, and Ethervile obviously gives us a way to cheat on mana. Liliana, Untouched by Death, when she's not comboing, this is just a very bad card. It just doesn't do anything, right? We kind of mocked it when M19 came out, I think, and we were right to do so. It didn't see any standard play. So that's kind of the
different
one.
Liliana. We didn't even talk about this one.
Oh, there's a different Liliana, that we were making fun of that Dan insisted might see some play. I do like Tragic Slip as a removal spell. It is one of those cards that gets rid of 1-drops as well as being able to kill Regent. That's something that, we've talked about, cards that can do that. There's so many ways for you to lose a creature that Tragic Slip will often be turned on. Although it is worth noting, if Rest in Peace is in play, Tragic Slip does not see that a creature died because a creature did not go to the graveyard. So just so that's in everybody's mind.
Yeah. Yeah, so this list looks, I don't think I have any huge recommendations. I like the Plague Belcher here as a little bit more of like a extra Mayhem Devil-esque effect over the Drelf's Messenger. I think all the lines get a little bit hosed by Graveyard Hate, but Drelf's Messenger certainly is not great in that situation.
Yeah, and you could even split it 2 Messenger, 2 Belcher. Belcher's -1/-1 counters actually work well with Messenger, resetting it if you sacked it to get an extra 2 damage to your opponent. Belcher also does a thing where you can play it can kill your gas, you can get a treasure, so it can be sort of like a mini ritual for a turn where you get extra mana that turn. So yeah, we'll pick and choose. We'll have to see which ones feel good or bad. Messenger coming into play tapped and not being able to block, especially in a format that's so aggressive, might be the thing that makes it not that attractive because we're already playing 8 1-drops that can't block. So it may be that Belcher does turn out to be the better card, as Damon's saying.
Yeah, it just gives you a lot more combo potential in the game 1s. I think you really need to try to win game 1s with this deck.
Yes, agree. Okay, on to list 2. I'm calling this Deadly Dispute Bombardment combo. So Deadly Dispute is another common from the new set. This is, as an additional cost to cast this spell, sacrifice an artifact or a creature. So you can sacrifice a treasure, or you can sacrifice a creature. And then it says, draw 2 cards and create a treasure token. So if you open on Shambling Ghast on 1, Deadly Dispute on 2, you can have 5 mana on your turn 3. That's a pretty explosive opening considering you also saw 2 extra cards. So it's card neutral between those 2. One of the things this list is trying to do is take advantage of Bloodghast and Citrus Supplier. So it's a lot more all in on filling the graveyard, finding, in theory, free value from your Bloodghast, etc., and trying to kind of rush to find your Liliana Untouched by Death. Because we're playing this sacrifice effect in Deadly Dispute, we are playing for Grief as a disruptive card. With the explosive mana potential, we can just hardcast Grief on turn 3, still have a treasure left open, or on turn 2, we can play Grief for free, look at their hand, take a card, and then sacrifice it if we'd like to. If we're worried on, our turn 2, can we take away their Rest in Peace before they cast it, for instance? So yeah, same kind of shell though. We're still trying to do the Liliana Untouched by Death, plus Goblin Bombardment, plus Shambling Ghast. We're a little bit lower on the Carrion Feeder Gravecrawler side because of the sort of Citrus Supplier Bloodghast combo, if you will.
Yeah, it's really interesting. One I think lesson we'll have to learn as we play more matches is, how does Deadly Dispute compare to Village Rites? They're obviously doing similar things. You sack a creature, you draw 2 cards. Village Rites, of course, is 1 mana cheaper. On the other hand, Deadly Dispute is more flexible. You can sack an artifact and you get a treasure. So should we be playing actually, 4 Village Rites, 4 Deadly Dispute and just kind of load up on these effects with our Citrus Supplier? Or is Deadly Dispute the right one, or is Village Rites the right one? Only way to learn is to try them out.
Absolutely. And all right, the third list, this one is going the farthest afield. This is a Shape Anew list. So Dan has been talking about, these regents are unkillable in the current meta. So I was like, well, what if we just got a really early Blightsteel Colossus into play? That's like a much better regent. So if you open on Shambling Ghast or Gilded Goose on 1, you Deadly Dispute it on 2, you can now cast Shape Anew on 3 on the leftover artifact. So you have these lines to have a Blightsteel Colossus in play on turn 3. The rest of our deck is sort of a bunch of hidden artifacts. So 4 Prosperous Innkeeper, Tireless Tracker, 1 Skullport Merchant, 4 Urza. Urza is both something that takes advantage of having a bunch of treasures in play, as well as providing an artifact if we wanted to Shape Anew. Or maybe if you have enough artifacts in play, just get going over the top and just generating 11 mana for your Blightsteel Colossus. What do you think about this shell, Damon?
I gotta say, I'm always a little bit skeptical of things that involve Shape Renewing into Blightsteel Colossus. On the other hand, I mean, this actually may be one of the best moderns we've ever seen for Blightsteel Colossus. I mean, nobody's playing Path to Exile, nobody's playing Teferi Time Raveler. On the other hand, they also maybe are just killing you in the air with a Murktide Regent and chumping it for a single turn. People are playing at least a little bit of counter magic out of the sideboard. People are playing a Braid out of the sideboard, which of course you laugh at, kind of, depending on how many treasures you have available as you try to line up your Shape Anew. So I don't know. I mean, maybe my preconceptions against the Shape Anew Blightsteel Colossus lines are from a past era of Modern that is not the Modern we see today.
Yeah, I mean, I share your preconceptions because I think I went 2-3 in a bunch of different Shape Anew shells, and obviously Modern is much more powerful now. But to your point, a lot of the cards that were getting me back then just aren't around anymore. And, if we're talking about a world where no one's playing Path to Exile, and, there just isn't time to play these Teferis because of all these one-mana threats, then, I'm kind of interested in it.
Yeah. Of course, if you run into like a Living End deck, they have an easy main deck answer to Blightsteel Colossus. If you run into the Footfalls deck, they play Brazen Borrower. So there are some cards that are still pretty hostile to the Colossus plan. Maybe you can dodge those matchups, or maybe you can fight through it.
Yeah, and so we are playing Sultai Colors. You can play more Hand Disruption than I'm playing now. You can board in a bunch if you like. I do have a couple Metallic Rebukes in here. You can play more or less of that effect as well. So you can be disruptive. There are a lot of sources of treasures and things here. Are there too many? Do we need more interaction? That's definitely something we'll have to work the balance out on.
Yeah. It's a fascinating list. I mean, the way that these cards work together, we have, Tireless Tracker fighting alongside Shambling Gas plus Deadly Dispute, Sit fighting alongside Shape Anew Blightsteel Colossus. It feels like they're all kind of doing separate things, but tied together by artifacts. And how that works out, does the synergy do enough to tie them together, or are they still kind of working in different ways?
Yeah, and I just really like the fact that you have all these treasures lying around, and you can always just turn them into cards. Like Deadly Dispute turns the food left over from Gildagoose into 2 cards and a treasure. Normally, if that food's left over and you don't specifically have Shape Anew, it's just kind of a wasted card. You hope you draw an Urza so you can turn it into, a Mox Sapphire. But you just have a way of turning any random artifact lying around into, let's give another spin off the top of the deck, and we're going to replace it with another artifact. It's not like we're, consuming our artifact fuel.
How close are you to playing a card like Academy Manufacturer in this list?
Academy Manufacturer is an artifact, so we couldn't play it with Shape Anew, correct?
Oh, right. That's just a constraint of that card. Yeah.
I thought about it.
There's so many
all
game
these treasures. Why don't I play that? And then I was like, but maybe that's the better way to go. Maybe just eliminating the combo and just being all in on that is worth doing.
Yeah, it's like this premise that like Shambling Gas is just sneakily well positioned right now.
Yeah.
That is an interesting. I mean, it sounds controversial to me, to say the least. But on the other hand, I mean, it also sounds possible.
Right. I mean, yeah, when you're just detailing like they open on Ragavan, you play Shambling Gas, it's like you've actually won that exchange somehow, and you've spent, a fraction of a penny on your play. Yeah,
and DRC takes a turn or two to power up.
Yep.
The Hammer Time lists, you can pop a Memnite maybe.
So like I said, this is a Dan kind of card. I'm sure he'll have a bunch of edits that he'd like to make. He also, went through a lot of 2-3s with me on the Shape Anew list, so we've all been, once bitten, twice shy on that. But I think there's definitely room there to explore, and it might be, combining some of these concepts. It might be like, Damon saying, maybe the shell is right, it's just the Shape Anew finish is wrong, and there's ways we can work around that. So I think there's something there with Shambling Ghast, and I actually really like the card Deadly Dispute, so I'll be experimenting with those in some shell. Those are our modern list for this week. Real quick, we don't want to forget about Pioneer, especially because I think it's a format that's a little bit more receptive to some of these hidden gems in Forgotten Realms. I kind of want to talk about 2 different builds that are going to take advantage of, these Indomitable Creativity, Transmogrify. We've seen those shells exist in the history of Pioneer, and they've always had Fires of Invention, Urian, and they've kind of always done the same thing, right? They get the Agent of Treachery, they take control, they bounce it with Urian, they, basically play a control shell. I have a couple of different alterations on those using some new cards that I think might be useful. So the first one is it Creativity? And it is using the card Unexpected Windfall. So Unexpected Windfall is an instant 2 and 2 red discard a card to draw 2 cards, and then put 2 treasures into play. So it functions in the way that we've seen a lot of variations on this. We've seen the 3 mana card that does it. We've had a 4 mana version of this before, but it wasn't an instant. I think the instant part of this actually matters a lot. The natural curve from 4 to 6 the next turn lets you just hard cast Shark Typhoon out of nowhere if your opponent's not ready for it. It makes 2 treasures, so if you are going to Indomitable Creativity for 2 and you have a 2-card combo, and that's what I'm proposing, the Locust God plus Sage Falls, it gives you the food for both of it right there. If you have an Improbable Alliance in play, as maybe one of your token generators, it actually triggers it on your opponent's turn, so you end up with a 1/1 and 2 treasures. I think the card just does a lot, and I think it's worth exploring.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, the Improbable Alliance was meant to be paired with Thrill of Possibility back in Eldraine. And now we're saying that Thrill of Possibility, a card that's kind of always been a fringe card in these blue-red spells lists, has been upgraded by making it cost 2 more mana but giving you 2 treasures back, which is a very interesting, normally by making this effect more expensive you make it worse, but being able to cash it in a turn later, especially with Indomitable Creativity, which allows if you have artifacts around, or even just a hard cast a Locust God or Shark Typhoon. It's very interesting. I mean, I think this list has certainly powerful possibilities with the infinite combo line with the Locust God and Shades of Falls.
Yeah, and then the rest of the deck is just a little bit more controlling. So we're playing 4 Fire Prophecy, 2 Valakut Awakening. That's so that we can kind of tuck our pieces, our Sage of Falls or Locust God on the bottom of our deck, if we draw them. We're playing 4 Censor, 2 Neutralize. So, in the early game, we're not all in on just making a token and just like having to fire off Indomitable Creativity. We can play a little bit more controlling of a game. We are playing the full fork Shark Typhoon. It's not just a cheap 1/1 to put in play. It's also just kind of our out against control. Control's going to be able to stop when we play our 5-mana sorcery, try to win the game.